Hey everybody, welcome to this. Well, it's the first live stream from Cloud Lunch and Learn,
Hey
actually. Oh, welcome to this. Well, it's the first live stream from Cloud I'll be
Lunch
back.
and Learn, actually.
Okay, let's try again. Seems to be working. Yes, okay. Hey everybody. So I've ran out of time there with that little bit of slip up, but welcome to the first live stream from Cloud Lunch and Learn for one of our learning sessions. Before we get into that, I would like to just give a bit of a shout out and let you know about our Ideathon. So Cloud Lunch and Learn team have put together an Ideathon. So as opposed to a hackathon, with the Ideathon, we're looking to get all types of people involved. So if you haven't already heard about the Ideathon, please go to our website, cloudlunchandlearn.com/Ideathon, and you'll be able to watch a short video on what it's all about. But basically, we are helping a wonderful woman called Evelyn, who has developed an app for dementia patients. We are helping her solve an IoT problem with that app. So Evelyn will let us know on the day more about that problem, what she's expecting from us, and then we'll have teams of people working to draw up a solution to that problem. So this is not just the technical solution, although that is very important. And it's not about creating it; it's about designing it. It's also about the business proposition. So we really need a wide variety of people. So project managers, business analysts, tech experts, IoT specialists, medical experts. Do you know someone who works with dementia patients? They would be more than welcome to join us. It will be Saturday, the 24th of October, full day. And you can sign up on the website. And the last date for signups is the 16th of October. So that's 11 days away. So you've got time, but I would get signed up fast. We're hoping for a good number of teams on the day with a good mix of people. We've had students, developers, directors sign up so far. And also, we will be giving out some prizes. So everything's always better with prizes, obviously. So if it wasn't enough that you're getting to solve a real life problem that will really help people out, those suffering from dementia, then there will also be prizes. So please do go to our website, cloudlunchandlearn.com/Ideathon, watch the synopsis video, learn about it from the team, and then sign up. Okay, we're going to get Michael in the stream. This is my first time, so just bear with me. And let's see what we can do here. Okay, let's bring in Michael. Drum roll. Clearly, I'm far too hyper for this. Hey, Michael. You're on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that. I think you definitely hyped me up there a little bit. Hopefully I can live up to that hype. So
Okay, good. Clearly I'm really excited. It's 6 o'clock here for me. What time is it there for you?
what time is it? It is 1 p.m.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's lunchtime. It's lunchtime somewhere. That's good.
There you go. There you go.
Awesome. So we'll just give it another couple of minutes.
For sure.
I have had to I had to shut down all my windows I had open, checking the channels that we were streaming to because I
Yeah.
was echoing back to myself.
It
So a bit of a noob error right there, but
yeah. I feel
we could
like
just
things
let
will
that go.
happen once you like jump into a live stream.
Yeah,
I use 1Password for all my password storage, and I needed to sign into the Cloud Lunch and Learn Slack on this computer.
yeah.
And I've never had a problem with 1Password before. And then 5 minutes before this, I couldn't get into 1Password. I'm like, that's cool, great.
That's funny because Hugo actually said to me today, Lisa, do you use LastPass? Like it would be a good idea. And you know, a couple of companies ago, they tried to get us to use that.
Sure.
And I just never got into the habit of it. And it really freaks me out a little bit. So I probably should adopt it soon. Do you know what I've done? I've created different edge profiles recently, which I'm loving.
Mhm.
I'm loving that. So that's good. But yes, okay, right. Before we'll give it another minute and then we'll start.
Sure.
So I'm just gonna bang on a little bit more about the Ideathon. So, yes. So, as I was just saying earlier, if you guys have just joined, welcome. Let us know in the comments in the chats where you're joining from. Is it just had a panic? Hugo said we were on mute, but we're good. Let us know where you're joining from. If it's lunchtime for you, what are you having to lunch? But most importantly, if you've not heard about our Ideathon yet, please go to our website, cloudlunchlearn.com/ideathon. Watch the short video from the team and they'll tell you all about it. We are looking for people to join teams on the 24th of October to solve a real life problem for an app which looks to support patients with dementia. And we're looking to solve an IoT solution for that app. It's not just technical people we need. We need everyone involved. It's an ideathon. It's about designing the solution. So we need to take into account the overall business aspects as well of that app. So we're looking for IoT experts, project managers, business analysts, medical experts. If you care for people with dementia, it would be great to have someone like that on one of the teams. So if you haven't already checked it out, please do. And I will be quiet now and let Michael crack on with telling us all about Kubernetes. So
Awesome.
I'm going to switch this around and let you have the floor.
Cool. Perfect. I think I'm sharing my screen, but yep, there you go. Perfect. Beautiful. Thank you. So let me just start this from the beginning. So first and foremost, just to make sure you can see my screen. Yep. Okay. I will take that as a yes.
Yes, sorry.
Perfect. Now you're good. Thanks. All right. So if you're interested in, Microsoft Azure as a skill, you can definitely follow on Twitter. You can follow on LinkedIn. Anything AKS related, there's this QR code here if you'd like to use that. And then obviously MS Dev IRL, great thing to follow on Twitter.
Yeah, please, guys, please do sign this QR code or go to the link there. It helps us register our interest that we're getting in these sessions, and you get learning materials relevant to the session. So please sign up.
Perfect. Cool. So a little bit about me. I'm a developer advocate at Octopus Deploy, which is a DevOps deployment automation tool. Essentially what we do is we handle everything after the CI layer. And then I'm also the founder of clouddev.engineering. That's my own personal brand where I do a ton of things like this. I do a ton of content creation, all that stuff. I'm not going to bore everybody with my bio, but here it is if you guys want to go back and take a look. So first slide. Now, I remember when I spoke to Hugo about this, and I'm like, yeah, I'm like, we should do like a Kubernetes session or something, around AKS, Azure Kubernetes Services. Um, and the first session, this session, was to help people like kind of get started with Kubernetes, and to give like that high level. But here's the thing: if you've ever looked at Kubernetes or heard about it, Kubernetes is a beast. So really, what I had to do with these PowerPoint slides was to try to condense as much as possible into a few slides, because if I didn't, we would be looking over like 400 slides. And obviously, nobody wants to do that because that's no fun, and everybody would be falling asleep at their desk. So, first things first, Kubernetes is a beast. So, what I did in these slides was, I tried to make it as condensed as possible, but still get that point across of like what Kubernetes is. So, what is Kubernetes? Well, it's an orchestrator. That's really all it is. So the better question around what is Kubernetes is, what is an orchestrator? Now, you might have heard of other orchestrators like Docker Swarm, for example, LXD, which is the Linux container orchestrator. There are a bunch of different orchestrators. It just comes down to the fact that like there was an orchestration war, a year or two ago, and Kubernetes just came out victorious. It's not that the other orchestrators don't exist anymore. It's just a simple fact that like Kubernetes is what's being developed on the most. It's what the newest features that are coming out right now. It's just it's the hotness right now. It's what it is. So the question doesn't really lie around like what Kubernetes is, because it's simply an orchestrator. It revolves more around what an orchestrator is. So orchestrators allow you to take your containers and scale them. If you have like Docker installed on your desktop, or you have Docker installed on like a Linux host or something like that, it, that's just like one container. You're just running one container, and maybe you're running multiple containers on that host. But the thing is like you have no way to scale them out. It's just you're just running that core engine from a Docker perspective. So what Kubernetes and orchestrators in general allow you to do is scale out those containers, whether you want 4 or 5 or 10 of them, whether you want them spread across different nodes for high availability. That's essentially what that orchestrator is going to do for you. So, like I just said, Docker is the engine, whereas the orchestration are the wheels. Gives you the ability to take you where you want to be. So think about it like that. That's how I always try to explain it: is Docker is the engine, orchestrator is the wheels on your car. You obviously can't get anywhere, without the wheels, but you also can't get anywhere without the engine. So that's the way that I like to think about it. So container runtimes. Now, when you think Kubernetes or containerization in general, you might think Docker. And the reason why, again, is because Docker is the most popular right now. But there are a ton of different container engines out there, and Kubernetes supports a lot of these. So you have Docker, you have Containerd, you have CRIO, you have any implementation of Kubernetes CRI, which is the container runtime interface. And the interesting thing about that is right now, I don't think that they've made the change yet, but right now, Docker is like that default runtime, and they're going to be implementing where CRI is that default container runtime. I believe AKS is still doing that. The last time I heard of it, that's what they were doing, was putting Kubernetes CRI as the default. All right. So now, when you take Kubernetes, you have the ability to not even have to use AKS or EKS and AWS or GKE and Google Cloud. Like, you don't have to use those services. But the thing is it takes a layer of abstraction away, that you don't have to worry about the management aspect anymore. Now, I've personally like spun up raw Kubernetes clusters, and here are a few key takeaways of it. One, you got to manage the master nodes and the worker nodes. We're going to talk about master nodes and worker nodes in just a second. The other thing too is like you got to manage the underlying OS. So if you're running Kubernetes on some Ubuntu boxes or some CentOS boxes, you got to manage those boxes. So you're talking about updates, you're talking about security patching, you're talking about RAM, CPU, memory, you're monitoring all of that. So the thing is that you kind of have to like set up your own. You have to manage it like you would any other infrastructure. So what a service like AKS does, hosted Kubernetes or Azure Kubernetes services, whatever you want to call it, you don't have to manage the master node. So again, we're going to talk about it in a second, but the master node is essentially where the API lives, how you interact with Kubernetes. Um, the other thing too is that worker nodes are virtual machines and they allow you to scale up VMs. So again, we're going to talk about worker nodes, but worker nodes is where your deployments and your pods and your containers live. So you don't have to worry about scaling that, manually. Whereas like, let's say you're rolling your own cluster and you're running in Hyper-V or ESXi or something like that, you got to bring out some new virtual machines. You have to install Kubernetes on them. You have to do all of this stuff. And then you're, able to put them into that load balancer wherever they may be and scale them out. With something like Azure Kubernetes services, you obviously don't have to do that because you have things like VM scale sets and stuff like that that you can manage it at the Azure level. So the other cool thing about AKS is that you can select different API versions. So I have used Kubernetes services across all three of the clouds that are offering it largely right now: Google Cloud, AWS, Azure. And what I can say is Azure for the past few years has always had the most API versions that you can choose from. So let's say like you need an older Kubernetes API version for something, or you want to upgrade it to like a preview or a beta or something like that. Azure is always the one that has all of the different versions available for you. It's actually how I got into Azure. I got into Azure heavily because of AKS, because I was originally using AWS and I didn't like that the API versions were so limited, and a few other things. And that's kind of what drove me to AKS. The other big thing too is like when you're using Kubernetes, you have to use some sort of network. I guess you could call it a framework, network framework. And there's a few different really popular ones. Weave and Flannel, for example, are really good ones if you want to take a look. But with Azure Kubernetes services, when you're hosting in Azure, you don't have to worry about managing that network layer either. You can kind of have, you have two options, and we'll see it today. You can either have Azure just manage the whole thing for you, or there's an advanced option where you can manage a few things. The other big thing too is you have container monitoring right out of the box. So when you think about monitoring, you think, typically a few things that come to mind is like CPU, memory, hard disk, the virtual machine itself. But when you're getting into containers, you have to go a step deeper. You have to be able to monitor the service or the process running inside of the container, because the container could be up and running just fine and happy and dandy. But the thing is that if the service or the process inside of the container is not running, it means your application isn't running. And you get that type of monitoring right out of the box with AKS, versus if you roll your own, maybe you got to use something like Prometheus or Nagios or something like that. So core Kubernetes concepts. Now, again, I looked at this list and I was like, you know what? There are 100 other things that I know I need to add to this list, but for the sake of everybody here not watching me read a whole bunch of PowerPoints all day for the next 3 hours, I correlated a list, and hopefully this will kind of get the idea going and the juices flowing. And if you're new to Kubernetes, it'll allow you to branch out to a few different places, that at least you'll be able to Google around and stuff and kind of get an idea of like what direction you need to go in. So the first is the master node. Now the master node is a ton of components here, but think about the master node as where the API lives. So when you're interacting with Kubernetes, you're using the command line, and at that point you are interacting directly with an API. That API is on the master. Now, the really cool thing about AKS is Azure manages the master node for you. So you don't have to worry about any of the maintenance or anything there. And you can scale it out as well. If you wanted to, you could have multiple master nodes. And something really cool that I just noticed in the portal today is you can have the master nodes in multiple availability zones, which is phenomenal. So you have even that higher level of scalability there, which is great. Worker nodes. Again, ton of stuff that goes into the worker nodes, but it's where the containers, pods, and deployments live. So anything from like where the container is, where it's running, is it a deployment, is it a pod, is it both? It's going to be running in that worker node. Now you have the Kube API server, which is the master node, and it's how the underlying Kubernetes APIs are exposed. And it provides you for the ability to use tools like kubectl or kubekettle, depending on what you call it. And that's how you can interact with it at the terminal. Now you also have etcd. So etcd again is on the master node, and it essentially just manages the entire state of the Kubernetes cluster, what the entire environment looks like. um, so that's a huge thing. I mean, when I was rolling raw Kubernetes clusters, I mean, you had to really think about the backup solution for etcd in your master nodes, because if you lose that, like that's it. Like you might as well pack your bags and go home and spend your Friday night, doing a resume updating event. It's wild. Like it's literally everything. So the master node in AKS, since it's managed for you, etcd is also managed for you, and that is such a lifesaver. I mean, it's a huge weight lifted off your shoulders if you're working with Kubernetes in production. So you also have the Kube scheduler, and what it does is when you create or scale apps, the scheduler can determine what nodes the pods and the deployments and stuff are going on. So let's say, for example, you got 3 worker nodes, and one worker node is at, it's filling up, it's going up, maybe it's at 80-90% capacity. The Kube scheduler sees that, and it's like, oh, I got to move the pods or the deployments to another worker node so this node doesn't get filled up. And it does that automatically for you. Like that's out of the box Kubernetes, which is obviously great because you don't have to worry about that application load balancing or the standard load balancing. Like instead of doing it yourself, Kubernetes manages that for you. The other thing too is that Kube controller. So I apparently misspelled controller here. Apologies. The controller oversees a number of smaller controllers that perform actions like replicating pods. So let's say, and we'll see this in, I believe, week 2 or week 3, where you can essentially have multiple replicas of the same application. So let's say you have like an Nginx front end or something like that, or some sort of Redis cache. You can either have one pod up with that application, or you could have like 5 or 10 or 20 if you want to. And it's all the same application. So let's say you update one of them, they all get updated. If you roll one back, they all roll back. So you have, again, that core failover in there for you. Okay, so with that, I'm going to jump into a demo, and we're going to take a look at creating a Kubernetes cluster. Now, there are a ton of different ways to create Kubernetes clusters. I personally don't use the UI that much. I'm typically like going through Terraform or Pulumi or something like that, or ARM templates. But I want to show the UI because, in my opinion, I don't think that you can automate something with like infrastructure as code or software-defined infrastructure without doing it manually at least once, so you can see everything that needs to happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close out of this PowerPoint and open up my dashboard here. Now, I already have a Kubernetes cluster here because I want to show later on in the demo a way to scale up, not scale up, I'm sorry, like upgrade the cluster to different versions to just show how easy it is. But what I want to do is I'm going to go through fully 100% how to create a Kubernetes cluster in the web portal. So I'm at the Azure portal here. I'm going to type in AKS, and we can immediately see Kubernetes services. So again, already have an AKS cluster here, and I'm going to click this add button. Now you have 2 options: either add a Kubernetes cluster, or this is awesome, register a Kubernetes cluster with Azure Arc. I was really excited to see that because I'm a huge fan of Arc right now, especially in Ignite. Like it's an awesome thing. Definitely check out Azure Arc if you haven't already. But we're not going to do Azure Arc today, unfortunately. We're just going to do Azure Kubernetes cluster. So I'm going to click add here, and we see a few options up top, and we're going to go through all of these, of course. But the first one is, what resource group you want it to be in. So I'll just say that it's in Dev 2, for example. I'll say Lunch and Learn O2 because I already have O1. Now I can choose my region. I'm in New Jersey, so East US is closest to me. Now, this was the availability zone that I was thinking of, or that I was talking about earlier, is that you can actually choose like what availability zones if you want more, master nodes across availability zones. And this is awesome. I mean, let's say you have like an availability zone, which is essentially like a data center in one place, and it goes down. You have a few different options, which is awesome. So for the purposes of this is a dev environment. I don't really care too much. I'm just going to click off of this. And then you have your Kubernetes version. And again, this is what I was referring to before. We're like, there's a ton of different options, and 119 is here. And I'm pretty sure this is still in beta. So this is, this is really great. So I'm going to choose this default here. And then now you also have the ability to select the node count. So what the node count is those worker nodes. So those worker nodes are where like your deployments and your pods and your containers live. And this is, you can essentially choose how many you want and the size. So if I go to like change size here, for example, it'll bring up a VM list, because remember, the worker nodes, they're just virtual machines. So I'm going to close out of this, and you can choose, as many as you want. You can go up to, actually, it looks like we can go up to 10 if we want to. And there's a few different limits here, depending on the quota in the subscription. And typically when you see this message, you just got to like reach out to Azure and ask them to up your quota. But we obviously don't need 40 to 1,000 because this is a development environment. So I'm literally going to choose one. And then I'm going to go to my node pools. So in addition to specifying the node pools, you can also add a node pool here if you want to as well. You can enable virtual nodes, so you can essentially burst out to ACI. And we actually on Azure Cloud Family, we did something a few months back where I showed how you can burst from AKS to ACI, Azure Container Instances. And essentially what that means is, instead of running all of your containers and your deployments on AKS, you want to save some money and not scale up a bunch of worker nodes, you can send all of those containers over to AKS. And then we can also enable VMSS, virtual machine scale sets, click authentication. Now, this is going to obviously be important because let's say like you need to get into the worker nodes for whatever reason. I mean, very rarely will you have to. You can set up a new service principal for that as well. You can specify what type of authentication you want. You have RBAC, you have AKS managed Azure Active Directory, which is awesome. If you already have Azure Active Directory, that's obviously a clear winner there. And then we can also choose the encryption type, which is encrypt at rest with a customer key, or default to encrypt at rest with a platform managed key. I'm going to click enter here. So this is where things get a little bit interesting. You have two options here for your network configuration. So you have KubeNet, which is like, that's the basic, like you're just going to let Azure essentially manage it for you. Like you're not even touching the network, which, in some cases like that may work out. If you're not a networking person, if you're not like, if you don't know, different CIDR ranges and different subnets and different classes and stuff like that, you may not want to like have to manage the network for yourself. So it's really, really going to depend. So if I choose Azure CNI here, for example, you can see that I can specify my CIDR, I can specify my subnet ranges, even the Docker bridge addresses, which is awesome, the DNS prefix names, because in AKS, core DNS is used on the back end. So you can specify a little bit of DNS settings here as well. So this is really going to depend. I mean, I feel like more and more I find myself just using KubeNet because like this isn't really going to impact anything that I'm doing from like a demo perspective, or like even really from a production perspective. I mean, unless like your network team really wants to get in there and see what's going on. But honestly, I usually just use KubeNet. Again, it's going to depend on your environment. And I hate the phrase "it depends," but it does in this case. So from a traffic routing perspective, you can also set up, like if you want HTTP application logging. From a security perspective, you can enable private cluster, which essentially is right here. So a private cluster uses an internal IP address to ensure that network traffic between the API server and node pools remains on a private network. Now, remember, what they're saying here, the API server, that's the master or the control plane. And then the node pools are like your worker nodes. So what this is saying is you just essentially have a private tunnel between the two. So, and then in this case, you can also specify the different network policies that you want to use. Again, this is going to be one of those things where like it's going to depend on your environment. You can absolutely choose none if you want to. And then you can also set authorized IP ranges. So what this means is, let's say you're on a subnet in an office, and that office is where the infrastructure developers, the developer team, whoever that's managing the AKS cluster, you can specify. So like, you only want those people to access the AKS cluster from an authentication perspective to the API. So as you can see from a networking perspective, there's like a lot of things that you can do to really get in here and customize it the way you want to. which is awesome. But in our case, again, I'm not going to choose that. I'm just going to choose none. And then I'm going to go to integrations. So this is interesting. Now, we haven't really talked about ACR that much, Azure Container Registry, but what Azure Container Registry does is it allows you to host your Docker images in a certain location, very much like Docker Hub. So let's say, for example, like, you're using an Nginx Docker image, you're using Nginx latest, you're pulling that from Docker Hub. So Azure Container Registry is essentially the same thing as Docker Hub. Um, Obviously, if you're using Azure and you don't already have anything in Docker Hub, it definitely makes sense to use the container registry, the Azure Container Registry, especially if you're completely net new, because it's already built into Azure. So like essentially, it's like why go somewhere else? So and then, but right now, like I don't have any, so that's fine. And then you can set up container monitoring. Again, super, super critical. So you can see the processes and the services living inside of those containers that are running in AKS. So in this case, like you can set it up by default. Like there's no reason to disable it. Always have it enabled. And we'll be able to see some of the different monitoring and stuff that occurs too, which is awesome. So now for the Azure policy, so you can apply at scale enforcements and safeguards for AKS clusters and centralized consistent manager through Azure policy. If you're using Azure policy, I definitely recommend it for sure. If you're already in that space, there's really no reason like why you wouldn't do it. So I'm going to next, and then you can specify some tags like dev uh, learn O2, right? And now we can go to review and create. So what this is going to do is it's going to run a validation, and then we'll be able to create our cluster. Now, creating a cluster, I've seen it take 10 to 20 minutes, and we obviously all don't want to sit here twiddling our thumbs for 10 to 20 minutes. That would not be fun. So that's why I have this other AKS cluster here. So this is what it looks like when it's up and ready to go. And you have different things like you can manage your namespaces, your workloads, your storage, your configurations. But what I want to do is I want to go down to, where is it? Is it Insights? Yeah, I think it's Insights. Okay, so this is the monitoring that's built in. Again, awesome. So you can manage your cluster and your nodes, but what I want to show is the containers. So again, by default, like you have containers that are running for your Kubernetes cluster. So I mentioned core DNS, for example, before, and here's the two core DNS implementations here. And we can actually see that it's all monitor again for us, like right off the bat. And you can see things like what the status is, what the image is, the image tag, the CPU limit, even the memory. It gives you a whole bunch of cool information. And any container that you deploy to your AKS cluster will show up here by default. Like you don't have to do anything, and we will see that during the demos. We have a full week on just like monitoring. So that's the monitoring perspective. Now what I want to do is I want to kick it over to the slides again, and we're going to start with this slide. So node security. Again, one of those topics where it could be 400 slides, but I've tried to condense it as much as possible. So when you're talking about master node security, again, that control plane where the API is, each cluster has its own single tenanted dedicated master. So you don't have to worry about sharing data with anybody else. You don't have to maintain the master. So the security is kept up with by Microsoft. Now, it's always a funny thing because it either goes one of two ways. Either everybody's fine with it, or they're like, no, we want to manage our own security, we don't know what's happening. My recommendation there is, at the end of the day, anywhere that I've ever worked, it's anywhere that a lot of people have ever worked, you could pretty much guarantee that Microsoft security is top notch. I mean, they're not just working with like one firewall with a couple firewall rules. Like there are dedicated teams for this specifically to make sure that this is secure. So I would definitely, put my money on, the security from a security perspective of having them maintain master. It's perfectly fine. So now worker node security, again, where the containers and the pods and the deployments and all that stuff live. So when an AKS cluster is deployed, they're deployed with the latest OS security updates. Because again, remember, those worker nodes, They're just virtual machines. So because they're just virtual machines, they need OS updates. So you're good to go there. The worker nodes are deployed with the latest. Now, Azure automatically, that wasn't a typo. I just thought it sounded better than automatically, applies OS security patches to Linux nodes on a nightly basis. So you don't have to worry about like, oh, I got to manage these clusters like I used to with my on-prem environments, with my raw Kubernetes clusters. Nah, you don't have to do that. Microsoft still manages that for you. Now, in terms of worker nodes, so all worker nodes are deployed into a private virtual subnet with no public IP addresses assigned. Now, this is crucial because if you've worked, in Azure before, it's really easy to just slap a public IP address on any virtual machine. I mean, there's been a ton of times where I've seen like public IP addresses on Active Directory servers or on SQL servers and stuff like that, which you obviously don't need. Okay, so now cluster upgrades, and this is the last slide. Now, cluster upgrades, i- again, this is like one of the coolest things is every Azure cluster has a path that you can use to upgrade and scale if you want to. And there are definitely some common scenarios. So one, from a security vulnerability perspective, listen, software, there's going to be a bug or two, or there's going to be some security issues. If you need to upgrade an API version, you absolutely can. And if you ever want to use any type of new feature, you absolutely can as well. So I'm going to click out of this. We are done with the PowerPoint. I'm going to go back here. And what I want to do is, this is the same cluster that I was in previously. I'm going to go to my scale here. And we can see, we'll have to go to this page here. Okay, so it's in node pools. So let's say, for example, we want to go to this Kubernetes version. Now, we can see that this node pool is using the latest version of Kubernetes supported by the cluster. To upgrade to a later version of Kubernetes, upgrade the cluster controller plane first in the upgrade menu item. So let's go to, where is that? Maybe it's under configuration. Okay, perfect. So we can go here and now we have the ability to upgrade. So for example, let's say I want to go on the latest, go to 118.8, I'm going to go to save. And now this upgrade is going to be in progress. Obviously, this may take a little bit. I don't think it's going to be a 1, 2, 3 thing. So, and with that, that's the entire week one. Week one again was really just to go over, like a little bit of security, a little bit of getting started with Kubernetes, and then spinning up your first Kubernetes cluster. And with that, Lisa, I'll go ahead and hand it over back to you. Oop, I think you're muted. Sorry.
Yes, I
There
am.
you go.
What I said was, thanks, Michael. That was an awesome session.
Cool.
I really liked it. Can you say this part again about the wheels and the engine? That actually worked for me in my head.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Say that again.
The part about the wheels and the engine when
Oh, yeah.
you were talking about orchestration and yeah.
Yeah, no, that's it's one of those things where like I try to put it into like layman's terms, because here's the thing, like when you think about, or when you hear about like Kubernetes and containerization and stuff, like it sounds so complex.
Yep.
Now, don't get me wrong, it absolutely can be. But when you're first getting started, especially with like a service like AKS, it is not that complex. I don't believe in the term easy. I don't think anything is easy. But what I can say is I do believe in simple, and getting started, it is simple. So the phrase is, let's say you have Docker, and Docker is your car engine, and then you have, Kubernetes. Kubernetes is your wheels. And you obviously can't go anywhere without wheels, and you also can't go anywhere without an engine. So
Yes.
they both tie in together.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It's taken me a while, but I'm pretty much getting into my head what containers are in comparison to virtual machines and other services. It's like I get virtual machines and I
Yep.
get serverless or microservices, and then containers is like in the middle for me. And
Right.
I've been trying to like really get it into my head as to what they are. But I really like that analogy. Love it, actually. I'm a fan. And also, because you said the word automagically, I have a sticker for you.
Awesome.
So, So there is a website, and I was going to give it a shout out now. Hi, Lise, if you see this. It's called pimpyourowndevice.com. They have the coolest stickers. But most importantly, as soon as you said Automagically, I thought of this sticker. So I'll send you the link and you'll have to get one.
Awesome. I absolutely will.
Okay, cool. To anyone who's still watching, sorry for taking over. Just a few things. If you, there's also some questions, so we can look at those. If
Cool.
you haven't already, please do scan the QR code that's in front of you, or go to the link that's on the screen. I'll pop it in the chat again, and register. It lets Microsoft know that you joined our session, which is important because they're supporting us at Cloud Lunch and Learn. And you will also receive free training materials relevant to this session. So please do that. We'll go to questions, and then I'll talk about the Ideathon again briefly, and we can then end it there.
Cool.
So someone did ask us to elaborate on Cube Controller.
Okay. So the best way to explain it is a controller is essentially a loop that watches the shared state of the cluster through the API server. And, it makes changes, attempting to move the current state towards the desired state. So for example, just essentially think about it as like it watches the shared state of the server. So, for example, like we were talking about etcd. So etcd is like, everything, your entire cluster. So if there's something different in there, like it'll look for that shared state as well.
Okay,
Another good thing that I could think of is like, for example, if anybody listens or knows about like Terraform, you have your TF state, your Terraform state. Kind of think about it like the same type of way.
Okay, cool. And then we've got, how do we spin/manage Kubernetes clusters for different environments? So for example, a dev environment, a QA, a prod, with minimal effort. It's always the magic question.
So it's actually very straightforward. And what that comes down to is your CED process, your continuous deployment and continuous delivery process. So when you have your continuous delivery process or deployment process, you have 3 stages typically. Maybe you have more, but you have a dev, you have a UAT, and you have a prod. Now, what you can do is, let's say you're using ARM templates or you're using Terraform or something like that. What you can do is you can specify your main template, and then you can have a bunch of variables or parameters that you could pass in at runtime. And then you can set up, your dev stage, your UAT stage, and your prod stage, and then pass in those variables at runtime for each environment. But your main configuration file can stay the same. And I do recommend like either ARM templates or Terraform for that.
Yeah. Templates are where it's at for consistency and ease.
Yes.
And
Yep,
someone has
absolutely.
just rang my doorbell, which is the thing with live. Okay, guys, I am going to just say one more thing about our Ideathon quickly. We have an Ideathon coming up on the 24th of October. We had our kickoff session a few days ago. Last weekend, you can go to our YouTube channel and catch up there. Please share it with all your friends. We're not just looking for technical people. We need everyone. We're looking to design an IoT solution for an app which will help dementia patients. So we're looking for technical experts, project managers, business analysts, problem solvers, and medical experts as well. So go to our website, cloudlunchandlearn.com/Ideathon. And that's someone now actually knocking at my door. So I'm going to go. It was great, Michael.
Awesome. Take care. I'll see you next week.
Bye.